Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and I'm so excited to be chatting with actor and writer Evan Marshall. Welcome, Evan.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. To start, I just love to hear about for you growing up. What were some of your favorite shows, movies, plays, would you say that influenced your work?
Growing up, so I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and I we went to the theater a little bit. There's not that much, or there wasn't at the time in Portland, Oregon, but we had Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which was very close, well, about 5 hours away down in Ashland, Oregon. There's not much else down there, but I don't know if it is anymore, but at the time it was basically the biggest regional repertory theater in the country. And they would do like 11 plays,
Hmm.
usually about five Shakespeare plays, three new ones, and three other more modern plays. And so that was probably my first exposure to a high level of professional theater,
Hmm.
um, and Shakespeare as well. And I really enjoyed that. And we would go every year. And I haven't gone as much recently, but so that was probably my introduction to theater. And I was into Shakespeare very early. So that yeah, I definitely enjoyed that. Other shows that really like made me think of theater as like, oh, like a really interesting art form. Like when I was probably 15, I saw a regional production in Portland, Oregon of Connor McPherson's The Seafarer. And it was very naturalistic acting, like a pretty intimate venue, but the actors were, very professional, and trained. And I just remember thinking like, whoa, this is like very raw and intense, in a way, and also like naturalistic. And in a way, a movie is,
Hmm.
not that theater, needs to be or should be that naturalistic, but I just remember being very struck by like, oh, these people are right in front of me and they're like performing very at a very high level. And I think that really drew me in. And then I went and got a degree in theater and
Nice.
was tracked.
Yeah, so you got your degree, was it University of Oregon, right?
Yeah,
BA your art
University of
school.
Oregon, which is not, it's not like it wasn't a BFA. It was just a BA in theater, so it wasn't, like a conservatory training or anything. It was very, general. You learned how to hang lights or stage manage or act or write or anything that you sort of wanted to focus on, but there was no like competitive conservatory element, and there was no summer stock either, because it was a trimester system. So, compared to a lot of other, theater makers you might meet, it was a little more general than some of the others.
Now, what is summer stock?
Summer stock is, it's often open to college kids who are working, getting their theater degrees or BFAs or something, and during the summer when they're not in class, they have an opportunity to audition for, repertory theaters that usually are out in like rural areas of America and do, a musical, a Shakespeare, another new play. Usually, nothing, no new theater, just like old classics to, entertain the people in the region. And it's usually a very good sort of like way to get your feet wet in theater in
Gotcha.
America.
Okay. And so you mentioned Shakespeare. Do you have a favorite Shakespeare play? I gotta know.
Um, I do love Hamlet. I love Twelfth Night. Midsummer, still the most profitable one you can put on. Everyone will always come to see it. That's a great one. I like Henry IV Part One a lot, and I like Henry V of the histories. Oh, and Richard III is great too. I like all of them. I mean, I
Hmm.
don't like all of them, but I like a lot of them. I'm a big Shakespeare guy.
So more so the comedies though than the tragedies, you'd say for you?
Oh no, I love the tragedies. I mean,
Hmm.
I love all of them. Yeah. I think I like the histories more than the average person.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and I think I like the problem plays maybe more than the average person. I really enjoy like trying to make those work or seeing productions that attempt to make those work. The quote unquote problem plays. It's interesting. It just, the joke about Shakespeare these days is that, no one ever performs it in the, Elizabethan time period. They're always trying to force some sort of, concept on the show. Usually that's like just like a sort of period. Like, oh, it's Romeo and Juliet, but we're in the Civil War.
Hmm.
And like that can be kind of bad.
Huh.
But every once in a while the concept works, or there, I just think I don't ever turn my nose up at someone who wants to just put on Hamlet for the sake of doing it, as long as they're doing it as best as they can do it. But if you're going to do it at, an equity theater where it's really, a real professional production, then you should have a real good idea of what you want to do with the piece. You can't just be doing it to do it, I would say.
I hear you. So like basically why you want to tell it that way, then
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. Okay, that's
It
interesting.
happens, like I mean, I think even at Oregon Shakespeare Festival,
Mm.
you have to do Shakespeare. You have to go through the canon. And so sometimes you don't have the best take on it, but you have to do it because that's your like sort of raison d'etre. So your results vary.
That's interesting, because what's funny is an interesting like factoid I've learned about Shakespeare over the years is that during actual times, like when Shakespeare was alive, that his plays weren't considered like highbrow society. They were considered like lowbrow. Have you heard about that? Which I find interesting.
Yeah.
It's like,
So
yeah.
Shakespeare didn't think much of his career in the theater as a literary endeavor. He
Hmm.
was more concerned with his poetry and his sonnets that he was writing, and various epic poems, because that in his time was considered high art, as opposed to the theater, which was low art. And, part of his genius is finding a way to make those plays, that medium very profound.
Very
um,
true.
you
Yeah.
you certainly weren't under any obligation to be that ambitious literarily. And there's certain of his plays that were written in like 3 days. Like I think As You Like It was like written in like 3 days, because it was just basically done on commission.
Hmm.
He had to get it out there, and he reused plots and took from other things. This is
Hmm.
becoming a Shakespeare podcast. I'm not
No,
sure if
it's fascinating though. I haven't actually ever talked about Shakespeare on this podcast, oddly enough, but I find it interesting because it's funny. This is just reminding me that my playwriting professor, he would always say play is primal. Like that's like in a way, besides oral storytelling, like one of the oldest forms of storytelling. So I still find that interesting, like that concept of it.
yeah, I think that's true. That's definitely true. I think it's one of those things where, like, no matter what, theater will always be relevant to people. It may not, I don't know what the next time it'll ever be culturally relevant, but
Huh.
it certainly is sort of spiritually relevant, I think, in a human sense, because it's immediate and it's right there and it's dialectical.
Very true, because there's nothing to me like there's nothing like just seeing a live performance. You're there in the moment with the actor. It's like electric in a way because it's like immediate. It's like either you're gonna get the laugh or not, you're gonna get the reaction or not. So,
Right. Yeah, there's no hiding.
very yeah, definitely. So, so for you, Evan, what made you decide then to make the leap to LA?
Because I like movies also.
Mm.
Um, and, you know, I've always wanted to do both. I like also, I just, my family's on the West Coast. I like the city of LA better, climate of LA better. And I just, yeah, I wanted to be in a place where I felt like I could, I'm sure I could do film in New York too, but I don't know, just it just worked out that way. I always say I would go to New York, but only if I had like if someone paid me to, which I would love. I
Oh,
love New York City, but or like
yeah.
Chicago, anywhere, like anywhere else in America, as long as there's work. But
I hear you.
uh,
I hear you. Honestly, yeah. Because I'm from New York, so I would like commute to the city every day, and but I like being here in LA, but like much different in terms. Have you been to New York at all or no?
oh yeah, I
Hmm.
go. I've been like 4 times. And now at
Nice.
this point, I go almost every year, because
Oh,
there's
nice.
family over there now. So yeah, I enjoy. I know we always see plays, so
Nice.
yeah.
I know. I love
Trying to
that.
keep up with the real theatrical center of the US.
You got,
Should be or not, it is. I
yeah,
guess
I know. That's
Chicago people would say, fuck you. It's I don't know if I can swear on this podcast, but
you're good. You could swear. You're all good. Um, That's funny if you put it that way. Yeah, because I know nothing like Broadway, even as like, as cliche in a way as that may seem like, like no place like New York, but it's true in my opinion, like no place like it.
Well, regardless of what's being produced there, people care to go to the theater
Hmm.
there, which makes it the center. Um, it's there's a cultural, more so than anywhere else, or maybe Chicago, but a cultural affinity, or like it actually matters culturally there, in a way that frankly it doesn't really in Los Angeles. Theater in Los Angeles, I think, is for enthusiasts of theater, and other people who make theater.
Well, honestly, yeah, it's like New York more so theater, LA more so TV and film. Like,
Right.
just from a obviously a generalized perspective. Obviously,
And
yeah.
increasingly just TV, um,
True.
in some sense, or it seems to me.
I wouldn't disagree with that, honestly. Yeah. So tell me about, so like when you got to LA then, what was kind of like your first endeavor? Was it short films? What was that when you first got here?
Oh man, when I first got here, unfortunately, I mean, this sort of like fits in with the play. When I
Mm,
first got here, like, yeah, I was auditioning for student films, and I was trying to write, I was trying to write sketch a little more because I thought
mm,
maybe that, that was very popular. There was like, improv and sketch was booming more than it had been in years. Everyone was going to Groundlings and UCB. You were, auditioning for terrible student films. Some of them were okay, some of them weren't. But mostly I was just working food service and catering, and that was obliterating my time and energy. And I didn't have the network because I'm just from Portland, Oregon, which is not, necessarily a podunk town, but it's not. It's not anywhere. It's not the cultural center of anything. And I didn't have the network, and I didn't have the inclination or the understanding to pursue, a show business career in the way that I maybe should have, or I don't know what should or shouldn't have happened, but and still to this day, I'm not super successful, but that took a lot of time away. I've lived in LA for 10 years now, but I mean, first, 4 years or so, I was just trying to survive.
I hear ya. Yeah. I've been here a little over a year and I'm pursuing TV writing in particular. So, and
Mhm.
obviously last year there were the strikes with both the WGA and with the actors too. And then I think possibly the Animation Guild will probably go on strike. I don't know, but I guess we'll see. But,
IATSE could go on strike.
true.
It's all,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother bag of worms.
Very true. I know, but you know what? In a way, it is relevant to your
That's
play,
true. It is. We could talk
honestly.
about that.
Yeah, I know we're keep like tiptoeing it. So let's get into the All-Star. So I had the pleasure of seeing your play back in March. So tell me about the initial idea for the concept of this play.
The initial idea. So
Mm,
that's actually interesting. The first, like the scene, it's like the second scene in the play is
mm.
a work meeting. And I probably wrote that scene, or like a version of that scene, like 12 years ago. And it
Oh.
just sat in some sort of drafts box because I had worked at Target. And the play takes place in a big box store. And so I'd worked for Target for 3 years in the summers from like 16 to 19. And I just like, wrote like a comic sketch of like something that I had, experienced, or the type of thing I had experienced. And then I wrote, a play for my senior thesis at University of Oregon. It was like, okay, I was still trying to figure out like what it even was to write a play. And then the next play I wrote, never saw the light of day. It's not very good at all. Um, and then I just wrote this play about 5 years ago. The like second draft of it was done because I don't know. I think I was just, like I sort of alluded to earlier, I was very frustrated, and depressed by my job and
Mm,
working, and feeling like I was just completely reduced to a menial laborer.
Mm,
And it felt extremely melodramatic and existential to me. And so, of course, I wrote a melodramatic and existential play about it. Not about it, but like it came out of that. That's where my brain was,
mm.
and that's what came out of my brain at that time.
That's like,
So
there you go. What's that? Sorry.
that was the seed
Gotcha.
of it.
Yeah, basically that feeling of frustration, and I guess, like that's to me is so relatable. If like kind of feeling trapped in your job that you're not passionate about, and it's just like a day in, day out, you gotta, you need an income, but it's like not fulfilling you in any other way. It's very draining that, yeah. Ooh.
Yeah.
Uh, that's very relatable, certainly. And I just have to say though, like, so in terms of the play itself, I just love how it begins with a love confession and then it ends with beating the shit out of the boss to die. I think that's
Yeah.
amazing, amazing arc. It's so good. So in terms of now the love story with Petra and Andrea, so did you
Mhm.
always have in mind like two female characters? Did you play around with genders with that in particular?
It's one of those things where they just were female characters in my brain. And the reason, I'm like a cis white male, so like why did I write about these two women falling in love with each other? And the answer to me that is I thought it was more interesting to have a female fighter than a male fighter. I think we've like the sort of like boxer archetype who's like fighting against the odds, and the odds are sort of like, you know, it's a little more metaphorical. The ring, the fighting, boxing in America has always been kind of like a metaphor in a lot of stories that we've told over the years in this country. But boxing is not really a it's not really what it was in American culture. It used to be one of the most popular sports, if not the most popular sport. Now it's not. And mixed martial arts has kind of overtaken it a little bit. And I am a fan of mixed martial arts, and I was a wrestler in high school, and sort of have a little bit of experience with sort of individual combat sports, and so I knew that milieu, and I think I've always been inspired, in particular, by female combat sports, as opposed to male combat sports. I enjoy watching the women's combat sports more, partly because I think it's just a little less dangerous.
Uh, uh,
Men can really almost kill each other a lot. But I think it's just a little more interesting to me to think about why a woman would want to do combat sports.
mm,
And most, I don't actually have the statistics, but anecdotally, it seems that the majority of female mixed martial artists are queer. And so I thought, well, it should be a queer romance. And then, queerness also provides another layer of difference, or otherness, juxtaposed against a sort of like structure that's already in place, a sort of heteronormativity that exists. So, um, despite the fact that I am not a queer woman, I felt that if I was careful, and it's up to, I suppose, the audience to decide how careful or convincing I was, I could tell a queer love story, in this play.
oh, really nice. And that's true because then that is, I see now like the theme of that connecting with like going against like what's I don't know the right way to put it. Not like I guess society in general, like what you were saying, heteronormative norms,
I think
basically.
there's a
That's true.
hegemony. There's a hegemony
True.
of power that
Mm,
exists, and so queerness is another thing that's sort of maybe not necessarily always against it, but set in contrast to it.
very true. And then because obviously then we have like literally the blatant sexism with the villain of the play with Blake, with him just kind of making a
Mm-hmm.
pass more than once at Petra. And like that's one of like the grossest moments, and I mean that as a compliment to you when he's like coming
Yeah.
on. It's just like ugh, makes you feel like because with this play, honestly, there are certain moments that Would you categorize your play like as a tragic comedy? Is that a right way to, would you
Yeah,
say?
yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Because there are certainly moments of levity, certainly really funny moments, but then those moments that hit, it's like make it like for me, I was like squirming. I'm like, ooh, like for example, the part where so I'm like looking, so I forget the names. When Oliver is like begging for his job back, and it's just like
Yeah.
just nothing. Like, oh God, like that, for example. Or the character is it, I believe it's Dan, who's like this more of like a lighthearted character, but then like he just hits you all of a sudden when he says, what was it? Like about like how his mom had died, basically. It's like, oh well, she got to see her grandchild. That's the right
Oh
character.
yeah, that's the Jules character. He says, "Yeah,
Oh,
my
Jules, apologies.
mom
Okay,
died."
yeah.
No, no, I mean it's a lot to keep track of.
Right. Yeah,
There's
but like just
nine
things like that.
characters in
Mhm.
the play or more.
But there's like a dozen or so more
Yeah, it's
like
probably too many, but there's a lot.
no, they're all compelling and they all obviously, and then like you have the customers too, a little bit of that too.
Yeah.
But so tell me about like kind of finding the tonal balance for you and just like moments where you know you wanted to like kind of make the audience squirm in a way.
Well, I love to make audiences uncomfortable. I think that that's one of the things that theater can do even better than movies can do. Um, but then you have a responsibility to, think about, why you're doing what you're doing and making sure it's justified and um but yeah, I mean, I love to me scenes of threat are something I've always responded to in theater. I think, Harold Pinter is one of my sort of like theatrical load stars, I guess. His work, Edward Albee, Joe Orton, like finding those moments of like, ooh, this is really, I don't know what's going to happen. This is maybe really dangerous. I think is even more visceral in the theater than it is in film because people don't really expect it in the theater. Because most plays that people see don't contain things like that. Because most people are like watching musicals, which I love musicals, but they just don't usually have moments like that. So when you really put one of those things in front of people, I find that it is something that surprises a casual theater goer most is like, oh, I didn't know that theater could be that sort of mean. I sort of like mean, but then you have to be careful because the audience can start to resent you if you're too mean. So you have to find, I guess, moments of comic relief or just relief in general that doesn't undercut your tension. And I honestly don't know whether I was successful in this play. This play what it ran like 100 minutes and there's just a lot in it. And I you know I would not begrudge an audience member for thinking I that took me on too many hairpin turns back and forth from essentially what is workplace comedy like into melodrama into heightened like magical realism into a you know brutal fight. I don't know if that worked for me. I don't know if it works, but it's what I had in me at the time I wrote it 5 years ago, and it at least was to my taste at the time.
It certainly worked, in my opinion. I'm not just,
So I'm glad you
but
enjoyed it.
absolutely. And, well, for what it's worth, like in my audience, people were laughing. People were like, I think on the edge of their seat and everything. What's funny is so then afterward, at like the sit down little Q&A afterward with the cast, the actress who played Melissa, Julie, she was saying that at a previous show, someone had booed her, which she liked. She was like, yes, you have the
Yeah,
right idea. So there you go,
love
like
that.
another reaction to that character, who basically is, for people listening who, if you haven't seen the play, she's basically like the HR person. It's like another accomplice in like the corporate America,
In the structure. Yeah.
Mhm. That's too funny. So there you go. So what for you in terms of like the characters, is there a character you like you would say you relate to the most personally?
Oh, Petra. Yes, Petra, definitely. Even though she's a woman who's Petra is kind of the soul of the sort of well-meaning ally. the sort of intelligentsia within the you know blue collar paradigm that is kind of like, well, I think I know more than this job requires of me, but for some reason I'm still beholden to it, and maybe I'm not as smart as I think I am, or have less agency than I think I do, or what I know isn't necessarily as useful to me as I imagined it might be, which I think a lot of people feel now, particularly in the arts. We're, the most educated generation in ever, but we have less economic opportunity or vocational agency than the generation prior to us. And so we are sort of chafing against this paradigm that is not psychologically good for us. Um, and it can feel dramatic, I guess. It did to me. So I wrote a play about it.
There you go. I know I'm kind of just like pushing it to the extremes because again, that ending. So like afterward, I asked them basically how they choreographed that whole fight scene, and they said like, well, they knew they had to end it with like her beating the boss to death, but they
Mhm.
like about it's about like kind of like finding ways to make it like feel organic and not choreographed. So I was like, that's
Yes.
interesting. Yeah.
That was in my stage directions.
Oh, was
I
it?
said,
Okay.
I said, it cannot feel like a choreographed fight in the
Mm,
sense of like an action movie,
mm,
or like a pro wrestling match or anything like that. It has to feel like a mess because if you've ever watched or seen a real fight, whether it's like fight videos or mixed martial arts, it's not uh, clean at all.
mm,
Um, which I think is a thing that Andrea, the MMA fighter, says is fighting is pretty boring unless you know what to look for.
mm,
And I remember like when I was wrestling in high school, you watch and people who didn't know anything about wrestling would watch a match, and the crowd who knew it would be like screaming about things that were happening, and it might even just be like a hand in a certain position, and then all of a sudden the crowd's yelling because they know, oh, a hand in that position means that the other person is vulnerable to a takedown. But another person who doesn't know the craft of it is like, okay, they looks like they're just pushing against each other. Like I don't really know what this is because it's not like basketball where it's just like, okay, well you've scored a basket or you haven't, or you baseball where you've hit a ball or you didn't.
mm.
Obviously, there's nuance in those things too, but I think it's even less perceptible in combat sports unless it's a knockout, or a submission, which is the clear thing.
Right. Gotcha. And to me, like one of compelling moment is when she's, I don't know what the right word is, hallucinating or just kind of dreaming about the founder who's just kind of like it's in Andrea when she like, and like the founder is trying to like basically tell her to not give up. So that's like after when she got injured from
The
her
fight,
fight and stuff. Yeah.
yeah. It's
Hmm.
it's like a dream sequence
Mm,
where she is the sort of avatar of corporate power, is talking to her about the fight that she just lost and asking her to
mm.
describe it. And so that's you can't show it because it's not a movie. I mean, I suppose you could, but it would be a different type of a more expensive play. Um, but I thought that would be an effective way to tell you what happened in the ring without showing you. Show don't tell, but in this case you have to tell don't show. But showing something else, I hope, by having a little sort of moment of surrealism in the show. Well, there's actually quite a few of those. A moment
Mm,
of heightened, non-naturalistic action. Some people reading the play always seemed to have a problem with that moment,
mm,
but I think no one ever expressed that they had any problems with it to me upon seeing it, which I knew would happen because if
interesting.
things make sense when they're realized fully as opposed to on the page. So I was happy that that worked out, or seemed to.
Definitely. Well, when you said they had a problem with that, you mean in terms of like thinking it wouldn't work?
I think they were just like, what is this? What's
Okay.
happening here? Why is this happening? What does this mean? And I had to sort of be like, well, just let's just see how it plays. And I think that's sort of just a dispositional thing where it's like you're either willing to go there or you're not. Like no one, I don't think I'm sure they're like not, like a director like David Lynch, right, would probably be the most obvious example where it's just like, why is this happening? What does this mean? And it's like you can either be okay with not knowing or it can bother you forever. But that's
Mhm.
just like a matter of your willingness to be to not know. But I don't
Mhm.
even think that this is, particularly cryptic.
No, that's interesting though. I like hearing about that. So in terms of like actually write, how long did it take you like start to finish writing like multiple drafts, like just like that process too?
Um, I wrote like I completed like the very first draft like 5 years ago. And then I did a reading of it and did revisions. And then the pandemic happened.
Mhm.
And in that time, I joined Theater of Note as an ensemble member.
Mm.
And then after working with Theater of Note for about a year, the play was within their sort of system of development, and they chose it to be staged. Unfortunately, it was by that point a 5-year-old play, and I tried to revise it as much as I could, but it kind of was what it was. So it was it's staged as it was.
Yeah, because you know what? Someone actually had asked during the Q&A was like, when is the play supposed to take place? And then people were like, oh, like when they said pre-pandemic, like then that made sense to people. I was like, oh, that's funny. To me,
Yeah,
it
I mean, I
felt
think it
like,
could take place now.
yeah.
I think that a lot of the things that happened in it kind of felt a little more on the nose than they
Mm.
did previously. Um, there has been an explosion of sort of labor potential in the last 5 years that just like was nascent at the time the play was actually like finished. So that's not necessarily to say that like it doesn't work anymore. I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of like, oh, I guess it felt a little more novel before. Before.
No, it felt very timely because again, like even with the strikes, so that's all very relevant,
Right.
I would say. But so, tell me about working with the director Maddie Downs, because I understand you guys worked together on like your shorts as well.
Yeah, so Maddie and I actually went to University of Oregon together, and
Hmm.
she was a year ahead of me. And we have just known each other and been friends and collaborators for many, many years, like over 13 years now, I think. And I asked her, "Hey, will you pitch to direct?" She had actually, so what had really happened is she had expressed interest to me in directing the play pre-pandemic. And we thought like, okay, well, what would that look like? We would produce it. How would we do it? And then I joined Theater of Note and they selected it. And so that became like they were essentially a producing partner
Mm.
on it. And luckily, they selected her to direct it. And that just that ended up working out. But in
Mm.
terms of her direction of it, I mean, she's a great director. She knows she knows what she's doing. I mean, all the stuff you don't see logistically is really huge. I think, structuring rehearsal and I couldn't have had a better collaborator in that sense because I don't do any of that well, and I'm not a particularly talented producer logistically. But even more importantly than that, she brought on great design people. Colin Lawrence, who is another person we knew from University of Oregon, a great scenic designer, an actor in his own right, an intimacy coordinator, Melissa McNamara, who had worked with before, who was super essential in, making sure that the intimacy of the play was, safe for the actors, and really, I think, brought it to life. And the fight coordinator, Jen Albert, who also has worked with so many people. I mean, she's like a total theater staple. Sorry, where was I? Jen Albert, an incredible fight coordinator, or fight director, choreographer, all of it. She's incredible. She works on all sorts of TV and film and theater. And she understood immediately that the fight should not look like a Hollywood fight. It had to look messy. And she was able to make that happen with people who, actors who had had a little fight experience, but not, a ton. So yeah, and with across multiple casts and coordinating all that. I mean, it's hard, when there's not really the proper financial resources to make theater, to do it in spite of that. I think it becomes a huge task of the entire team and the director to work within that. So I can't say enough about how good they were.
Oh, that's wonderful though. And because then, I mean, yeah, you ran for over a month. You ran from February 29th through April 7th. So like that was a solid run too, which is great. And
Yeah, that's what Node does. They do like 6 week runs, and I think that's primarily to make sure that people get around to seeing it,
Mhm.
for it to have enough time to be reviewed and to, yeah, it works out, I think.
And then in terms of like casting, were you involved at all with that as well? Or is that more so like you
Yep,
give them?
I was at
Mhm.
every audition, and I definitely gave my opinions.
Oh, nice. Yeah, of course. And then in terms of you being the understudy of Blake and Blair, was that like plans too? Like, did you know you wanted to like have a partial role in actually acting in your play as well?
Well, when I wrote it, I was hoping I would play the manager role, but that just wasn't logistically possible due to just having to produce it and work on it from sort of off stage. So being the understudy was the move. But I'm glad I got to do 3 performances of it, because I suppose I do think of myself as an actor first and a writer second. But writing is something that you can do no matter what, and acting is something that you have to have someone else's permission to do more than writing.
That's true. Unless like obviously if you're producing your own stuff, which of course you
Right,
have to. But yeah, I hear you though, because it's still like obviously with this like going through a process of finding the right fit for a role. But yeah.
right.
And well, actually something I wanted to bring up, I wonder if you have insight on this, or maybe I'm reading too much into it. Something that also stood out to me was that during like the changing of the sets between each scene, maybe I interpret it this way, but like what I found interesting was that the actors stayed in character. I don't
Yeah,
like I noticed that. Was that I guess that was intentional. I found that interesting.
definitely. I think, and think it makes sense because they're, if they're moving the set, they're employees, they're doing labor, they're, yeah. So I think that
Yeah.
worked. A lot of
Yeah, it
people
worked.
commented on the scene transitions, which I think Maddie, the director, would be very pleased by, in that they were, you know, quick and smooth, and because there's 10 scenes in the play, so
Mm.
uh that's tough.
Well, that's interesting. It stood out to me because like seeing Joseph Bricker, for example, as Blake, like just like angrily pushing things, and like I was like, oh, that's funny, that's interesting. Or also like the music in between too. I know
Yeah, we had a
it's
great sound
mm,
designer, Aaron Bednars, who's would very professional, accomplished sound designer who works in a lot of equity theater around regional theater around the country. And we were just lucky to have her because Maddie had worked with her in Seattle, and she was able to do sound design for us at far below her rate. So we're
oh,
very grateful to her for that.
really cool. Because also like what you were saying earlier about like with plays, in a way, a lot of tell rather than show, because it's like in a play, obviously you're sort of limited in terms of things, like obviously compared to a movie where you could just kind of like you said, like show flashbacks, for example, and like things like
Right.
that. And different sets, obviously it's much different. But in terms of like storytelling, it's similar structurally, and like you have the inciting into like, it's like similar structurally with like the narrative.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and especially when you only have a black box space, right? You just have
Mm.
to like find a way to make that thing a whole world in and of itself. And that's something that the scenic designer Colin was so great at, is he used like forced perspective and like a light grid of LEDs to make it look like the store sort of went on much further back, on forever, even though, the play space was like what, like, 5 yards by 5 yards. but it has to feel like a vast big box store. And so he designed those shelves to sort of be able to move and reconfigure, so that this, tiny space could be many different spaces within a much vaster matrix of things. And that was genius on his part.
I think it was interesting too, having like utilizing the entire space, like when actors like would leave the scene, like go through the doors of like the theater itself. I was thought
Yeah.
oh, this is really cool. Like adding to like the kind of danger, like with the cop character, for example, like that's really cool. And like it's just really interesting. The customers coming and going, and then like from the audience, it's just adds like to the fun of it too, making you
Yeah.
feel alive. Yeah. But so in terms of like at Theater of Note, what was you said that you starred there as an actor. What other productions had you worked on at Theater of Note?
Well, I actually only joined, during the pandemic, and then
Mm,
getting the company back up to speed has been like an ongoing process that everyone's undertaking. So I helped a little bit with Kill Shelter, the production just before us, which won Best Production from LA DCC, the LA Drama Critics Circle, and like was a extremely critically successful and just everything successful play. So that was a big boon for Theater of Note. And then I'm helping produce the next show that's going up, Electric Eye by Shane Easton, which is going to be good. So everyone come see that. But in terms of the other plays that I've been in or involved with at Theater of Note, none. What I do is I am one of the chairs of the Literary and Development Committee at the
mm.
theater. So I read a lot of scripts that come in, and help coordinate the selection of the season. But yeah, that's mainly what I've done so far at Theater of Note. That's probably all I have the capacity to do. Maybe I'll
Oh,
audition for the next show. I don't know.
that's exciting though. So in terms of producing the next show, what does that entail for you exactly?
Finding, helping to find designers and
Mm,
actors and all, and helping to schedule and helping to raise money. And so in particular, what I'm hoping that we'll do with this next one is find grants as opposed to reach out to people for sort of micro donations. We're all hoping that more grants can be obtained, but we do have fundraising events that are also being organized.
mm.
So that's what it all amounts to. Finding
It
the cat.
all it all goes back to just a love of theater, a wanting to share these stories with people. Yeah, so that's really wonderful though. And then you have this whole community from it. That's really great.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people really I mean you don't get any money from it. And in fact you lose money doing it. But like, I suppose somewhat of the hope is that someone with more power than us sees it and says, "Hey, you want to be in something else that I actually have money for you for?" But
Right.
either way, it is for the love of, and that's kind of true at any theater, regardless of whether it's a black box theater or a you know uh, equity rep theater, like the Geffen or the Mark Taper Forum. They're not raking it in ticket sales. They're reliant on private donors and grants in the same way that anyone else is. Because theater, again, is not it's not the movies. It's for enthusiasts.
Mhm.
And that's fine. That's fine.
It's true. I mean, that's the reality of it. But yeah, again, like just for the love of it. But I did want to touch on, so to switch gears, I did want to touch on a couple of your shorts because I watched A Home Invasion. And
That's
so
the most recent
similarly,
one.
that's your most recent one? Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
because that similarly you have a structure in terms of like the intensity of the emotions where these two characters are basically like, screaming and yelling at each other, taking off their wedding rings, like fuck you, and then at the end they're making out. Like so good.
Yeah.
Too funny. So like that home invasion brought them together. And so
Yeah.
that was with the actress was Jessica Bishop.
Actress Jessica Bishop, who I've
Mm,
known for a long time, is a very talented actress, and Maddie Downs directed that as well. So
mm.
she's directed the play and the we wrote that short together.
That's really cool. So what was like I'd love to hear a little bit about that, like the initial idea for that one in
Oh, the
particular.
initial idea for that one. So, But we're always doing political stuff. It's always socially conscious. The next thing I
Mhm.
do is not going to do that, but or maybe it will. I don't know. I don't know if I can
Mhm.
ever get away from it. But what happened was, if you'll recall, there's a big outpouring of protests in 2020 over the killing of George Floyd, and there were two people, I believe, in no, I don't even remember, some Midwest city, and he was like a lawyer, and they were in their 60s, and they came out onto the lawn of their, nice house in a gated community and pointed guns at the uh, protesters walking by, or like, peacefully just sort of walking by their house because they, just felt like they were under siege and their guns made them feel like they had more control over the situation. And we thought, well, it would be funny to do a short from the perspective of those two people and see like what makes them tick, what's going on in their lives. But of course, the joke being that, like everything, the danger is imaginary. The home invasion is not actually taking place.
Yeah.
They are not under threat. They are the threat to themselves and to everyone else. And so, of course, they end up shooting an innocent person who's just trying to return their dog. And that's kind of a mean it's kind of a mean little short. And so like, your whether or not you think it's funny, I guess, is
Yeah.
is dependent on, I guess, one, your political persuasion, and two, your just like taste for dark humor. The other thing that I think makes the short even meaner is that the protester is like kind of uh just a guy who is like, oh, I'm a pro-democracy protester. It does his protest is not like for anything with teeth.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, oh, I think we should vote. And of course, for us, the message sort of was like, well, if you're if the sort of the limit of your political ambition is trying to get out the vote, don't be surprised when you get shot, because you might. like
Mhm.
you because the rules are different for people who want them to be,
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
guess. So yeah, that was we tend to make things that are not nice.
Mhm.
And I think that I look back on them and I go, well, could this have been more accessible? Maybe, but I guess that's just where our head was at the time. Yeah,
That adds to like the voice of it. Because like art, obviously, like in a broad sense, it's like, what do you want to say? How do you want to say it? So then,
yeah,
yeah. So everything's always a product of its time, obviously, and like whether that be the political climate or just, yeah.
right. Yeah. And I don't know, I guess I've always been interested in making political art, even though I don't think that making art is a political act. And especially not theater, because no one goes to see it. But only organizing is political action. So if you're making political art, you're doing it, I suppose, to assuage your own sense of self, which is not a bad thing. It's just, it
Mhm.
is not. I'm not one of these people who's like, theater can change the world. No, it can't. It's just an expression of what's going on in the world, and that's fine. I'm comfortable with that.
Well said, though. I agree with that. And are you allowed to share like what you're currently working on, like new scripts, anything?
So Maddie and I are working on a script that is about I don't know if you've ever been to Washington State, but they have bikini barista stands where the baristas are in bikinis as they serve you coffee.
Oh.
And it's just kind of like a titillating thing that they do to drive traffic to their stands. And we are writing a script about like a sort of labor dispute at a bikini barista stand. So that will be much more lighthearted, I think, than the AllStore was. And then I'm always working on shorts with other people or just various other projects. My friend and had like a zombie movie that I'm helping him write. It's just like a stoner comedy, and
Mm.
I'm also working on a a, a noir, a sort of like neo-noir film. Yeah.
Well, that's
So
exciting.
there's things. Yeah, comedies, dramas. I like to do things that are sort of in between, like in between those things. So
Mhm. That's
dark.
more so, that's more and more in TV, honestly. Like it's like a blurred line with like shows that are considered comedies but aren't necessarily, I do find that
Right.
interesting too.
It's very in vogue.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. I think some people don't like that. But I
Hmm.
don't I've always I don't really think of myself as a comedian. Like I've done the training for various things like improv and clown and all that, but like I
Hmm.
don't and Maddie was a stand-up comedian,
Hmm.
but I've never really thought of myself as a comic. I just like to have comedy in things.
To be honest, it's true of life. Life is ups and downs, comedy, tragedy. You find the comedy in the so it is like,
I've always liked tragicomic things. I like Chekhov. I like stuff that's both. Um,
yeah. Like this existentialist. It's true though. Yeah, it's really interesting to me. But so this has been such a pleasure. So as we're wrapping up, I love ending my interviews by asking for advice. This could be career advice, life advice, best piece of advice you've gotten, any advice you'd love to share.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not particularly successful, so but but so this isn't even advice about how to be successful. I would just say, psychologically, as an artist, um, make your own stuff or help other people make stuff. And don't do it because you expect anything in return.
Mm.
Do it because you want to be a part of making something. And to that end, just be a person who is make being creative so that people see you as a person who does creative things because that's more important than being famous or successful or anything like that. It's just, yeah, you have to just be don't lie. Don't hide the ball. Don't if someone asks you what you're doing, tell them. This quick story I have is when I was early on doing catering, I was really miserable and I was like, nothing's going anywhere for me, blah blah blah. And I had a person who was catering with me, and he was just like, well, what do you like want? Like, what's your like main goal or whatever? And I felt like less than as an actor, so I wouldn't like tell people I wanted to be an actor much, or I wouldn't tell people about my immediate aspirations. And I don't know, I had sort of like had enough of it that day. And I said, well, like what I'd really need to do is I need to become SAG eligible. Like I really need this. Like I'm trying to be an actor and I need this. And he was just like, oh, well, I have a friend who's shooting a movie who's Taft-Hartleying people if they can bring, enough other background. And he can Taft-Hartley you and he can make you SAG eligible. And it was like, oh yeah, well, if I had just done the thing I normally do, which is pretend I'm not a creative person, then
Mhm.
this person who I had no reason to believe could help me in any way would never have known and would never have helped me. And we weren't friends, we were just coworkers. He didn't owe me anything, but he was nice enough to do it. And, so say it loud and proud and help other people, because you never know when you'll be helped in return. And that can
It's
take many forms.
it's so true because yeah, it's like anyone could be somebody who can help you. It's all a matter of just like pursuing your craft and like what you just said, don't hide it, like share it with people. You don't know what it could lead to. That's interesting. You worked as a caterer and that reminds me of the show Party Down.
Party
That's
Down
cool.
is one of the most
Yeah.
real shows.
Yeah.
That is nothing, basically nothing that happens in that show is wrong.
Yeah.
That is catering.
That no joke, like the way it like when they brought it back years later now, that like to me was like the most seamless, like it didn't feel like a reboot, like you know what I mean? Like it was just sort of a continuation. That was brilliant, like season three when they brought it back recently. I was
I
like,
have
holy
not seen
shit.
the new episode, so I should do that, it sounds like.
It's yeah, you're gonna love it. Like they didn't miss a beat. I'm telling you, it's like wow, amazing. My gosh, but fantastic advice though. I appreciate you sharing that because again, it's like you gotta You gotta just like again, do it for the love of it.
Yeah.
Whatever it is you want to do it for the love of it. So agreed with what you were saying before. So please feel free to share your social media. Anything else you want to promote, Evan?
Oh yeah, I am just Evan W. Marshall on Instagram. I'm like have a link tree, just Evan Marshall. And then on that you can find all my little things that I do. Oh, and I have a podcast myself. It's called Parasocial Movie Friends. So please pick your phone up right now and subscribe to that. We just talk about movies. It's just like a movie club. We just talk about movies. We don't do any research. We don't give you any insight. Well, we do give you insight, but we don't do it through research. We just talk about movies.
Oh, nice. That's always fun though. Real quick, what's your all-time favorite or what's like a movie you've seen the most?
The movie I've seen the most is
Mm,
Pirates of the Caribbean: Curse of the Black Pearl. It's a perfect Hollywood blockbuster. But my favorite movie, I'll give you my letterbox top four, is
sure.
Lawrence of Arabia, Y Tu
Mm,
Mama Tambien, Fish Tank by Andrea Arnold, and First Reformed by Paul Schrader.
okay, I haven't seen some of those. I'll have to look into that.
Check
Interesting.
out those movies.
Oh, nice. Okay, we'll do. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you for your time. This is great.
Thank you so much. It's so very nice of you to ask.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we were able to like delve into your play and just hear about your creative process. I love all that stuff. So it was great.
People can find the play too if they want from that link tree. I have it. It's on New Play
Oh,
Exchange, so you can read it if you're like, what are they even talking about?
oh, God.
You
Yeah.
can read this play. It's not secret. It's
Think
out.
again what you said before. I don't hide things. Share it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Good. Okay, good. Well, I'll link to your link tree so if everyone could all
Yeah,
your
that'd be great. Thank you.
or will do. And with that, that's going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. Check out storytellingsaga.com, and as always, feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Until next time, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.